are moving on with our mobility sector. We've talked about logistics, we've talked about data. Now we are going to be looking to the skies and talking a little bit more about aviation. Does anyone of you work in aviation? Oh, quite a bit. All right, you're in the right place. Good. Well, hopefully this teaches you something you didn't know or challenges something that you already think you know. Please welcome the moderator of our panel and her panelists, Policy Officer at Bitkom, Leah Schrimpf, and her panel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that very warm second welcome for particularly me on this stage today. I'm very, very glad to be here to talk about digital takeoff innovations in the air. Maybe to give you guys a little bit of context before we go into it, the aviation industry has long been a driver for innovation, be it with regard to engine design, material science, automation. Innovations have always spilled over from the aviation sector to other sectors. However, tech or hardware innovations have always really been at the forefront of this, while the backbone has always been digital innovations, and especially innovations in the data field, which is what we want to talk about today. And I'm really excited to have two really inspiring speakers here with me today, which I'm happy to introduce. We have Klaus Seywald, who is Head of Digital Products and Strategy at Volocopter. Glad to have you. And Xavier Lagardère, your Chief Data Officer at Lufthansa.
Hi.
Yes, glad to have you both. To begin, I'd like to take a little bit of a closer look how both of you in your day-to-day life really strategically use data to have different effects on the way we see, we utilize, and experience aviation. Maybe starting with you, Klaus, maybe you'd like to briefly explain to us what your mission at Volocopter is and what role data plays in your personal day-to-day professional life.
Sure. So we at Volocopter, our mission is to bring a new mode of mobility into our cities, which is sustainable aviation. And for this, on the one hand side, we are building a new type of vehicle, an electrical air taxi, which is electric, safe, and very quiet. So it actually fulfills the requirements so we can travel into the inner city with an air vehicle, which is completely new. But on the other hand, we are also building a new digital platform to enable this type of operation, because we foresee a very different type of operation than classical aviation. Because we essentially want to combine the safety and the operational needs and regulatory requirements of the aviation world, but make a service that is as flexible as an Uber. And for this, we are building VoloIQ, which is essentially also my role at Volocopter. And this is the platform where we're essentially trying to integrate all the data from different perspectives, both tightly coupling the customer angle, so the booking engine, our app that will be available to book our flights, and tightly couple this with the operations, so integrating with the air ops, with the dispatch, and let's say the flight corridor surveillance, and so on.
It's super fascinating. Again, every time I hear you talk about it, it sounds like a little bit of science fiction to me, and I'm really fascinated that what you're doing is already reality. Xavier, same question. Judging by your job title, I assume data plays a really large role in your day-to-day life, and maybe you'd like to expand on how you utilize data in your job, or at Lufthansa in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I assume that Lufthansa itself doesn't need an introduction, so in my role as Chief Data Officer, of course, data is at the center. I actually wear two hats within Lufthansa. I'm also head of innovation for the group. And that's a statement we have made sure that data is at the center of how we look at the future. Our business is truly data-driven. Every aircraft of our latest long-haul fleet generates 2 terabytes of data on any given flight. On a month of flying that fleet, we fill the entire Netflix database. That's from the volume standpoint. Yet any data is only good as you use it. And my mission and the core of what we're doing at Lufthansa Group is make sure that we are becoming gradually more data-oriented in our decisions, but also that data pays into every service that we offer to our passengers towards delivering premium personal services, as well as leveraging efficiencies and becoming more sustainable.
two of the aspects that we want to do little deep dives on. You've both already touched upon. But before we go into those, Klaus, we at Bitkom recently always do studies on the use of data and how companies perceive they are using their data. And the most recent one showed us that only 7% of companies in Germany feel that they are using the full potential of data. Just maybe in general, what would you feel, or what do you feel really needs to happen for that to change across all economic sectors?
So I think a huge lever is to integrate all the data to really make it usable. So data integration and cleaning, and this also across different modes of mobility. And this is especially also important for our operating model in the end. We want to be an air taxi service, and what we're trying is to sell a time saving essentially to our customers. So our service only works if we tightly integrate with other modes of mobility, so we can actually realize that. So I think in the future we'll see much more and much tighter integration of data between different modes of mobility, and I think this will be a core enabler.
And Xavier, question to you. You said Lufthansa is a data-driven company. Do you feel this sort of 7% perception of there's only 7% of companies that feel they're using the potential of data? Does that apply to the aviation sector?
Yes, certainly. As a system, as a sector, the aviation sector still has a long way to go in terms of integrating and sharing more data. Actually, there's a very important piece of European regulation that's just been passed a couple of days ago. That's the EU Data Act, which for our sectors imply a more open access to B2B data. And that's going to enforce collaboration across different players in the value chain, from aircraft makers like Volocopter, but also the ones that produce today's aircrafts, to airlines, to airports, to air traffic controllers. That's a very important piece. And basically the industry is only stronger and offers a better service when it works together. The other aspect that's maybe a bit more internal is we're striving to make our data fair. And for those of you that are familiar with the acronym, you know that stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Like every large company, we are making strides to simply make the data findable. That's the beginning to leveraging it in a very diverse environment. You know, the Lufthansa group, worked at the level of the group, is a variety of airlines, is a cargo company, it's also a maintenance company. All of these data sets are hosted in a heterogeneous hyperscaler environment. We have it all. And from a technical standpoint, as well as from a user and a governance standpoint, this requires things like, at the baseline, data catalogs as concepts above this data mesh in order to create an access that is still work in progress. So I would certainly subscribe to this, especially at the scale of a very large corporation like us. There's still strides ahead of us to make in order to leverage data.
And I imagine it makes a big difference whether you're doing it sort of from the ground up when you're building a company in contrast to when you're trying to do it for a company that's already been established over a long period of time with processes and data being sort of collected and stored in ways over long periods.
Absolutely. With soon close to 100 years of legacy, there are data silos that used to be there and have been there for good reasons. Even without looking at corporate silos, customer data are governed by GDPR. Most of our flight data have actually to comply with some union regulations, to comply with what is being agreed with the pilot unions. All of these additional constraints, regulatory constraints, pose a challenge to bringing the data together. And like I was saying, at the level of the industry before, where different players can work together or should work together more in order to uncover insights, the same is true for us internally. We only end up giving you, if you happen to be stranded or delay, a good data-driven response if we're able to marry your data that you've entitled us to work with the operational data of the aircraft that you're sitting in, with the fleet data, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of what we're doing is converging this data in order to be able, and this is where AI comes into play, because with the scale of data that we're talking about, we're not able to base ourselves on rules-based, expert-based system anymore, but really have to work at the scale of machine learning, AI-type domains.
Yeah, and you touched upon the delay topic, which is a big part of passenger experience as well, and how data can improve passenger experience in the long run. Klaus, maybe also with regard to the development of VoloIQ, which is your all single-hand sort of software solution, how do you use data to really improve passenger experience with regard to the future of mobility as we know it?
So, as Xavier said, we're in a bit of a different situation. We're only starting operations next year with our Volocity in Paris. But for us, this data plays a critical role. As I said, we are an air taxi operator, so from the beginning, we need to be able to really seamlessly integrate with other modes of mobility. And data is the only way to do that, and also the only way to make our business model sustainable. And in that way, we are leveraging data for the integration with other modes of mobility. But then also, of course, our flights are very short. They're like 10, 15 minutes over the city. So passengers, they don't want to spend a lot of time at the terminal checking in, going through security. So we're also leveraging data to smoothen the customer journey from booking to check-in, and then also innovating the passenger boarding process, where we've recently also started a partnership with SITA, an established aviation player, that works with us to really innovate on the way passengers board, so we can actually transfer the passenger very efficiently to the flight, and the passenger can start the flights smoothly. And then thirdly, of course, disruptions will play a major role. There's always something that can go wrong, be it the weather, be it an aircraft, or being even a passenger being late. And data can be used then to do more proactive disruption management. If we know where the passenger is, we know the passenger will be late, we can already take actions before the passenger even has communicated anything. So we will try to really start this from the beginning. And this is kind of the luxury we have, starting a new platform from scratch, that we don't really have to integrate a lot of systems, but we basically building it from the beginning. But then the disadvantage, of course, we don't have the richness of data that Lufthansa has from its years and tens of years of operation.
Absolutely, and I mean, Xavier already, he dropped the big word, which was AI. Maybe, Klaus, what role does sort of AI and machine learning also play in optimizing your systems?
So currently, honestly, not a big role. We just don't have enough data yet, but we will use AI both for the customer journey, but then eventually also to integrate the customer perspective with the operations and really do also disruption management proactively. And then one key aspect for us is, of course, also then transition towards autonomous flight, where we'll need AI, but this is more longer in the future. And I'd say nearer in the future is really to optimize our battery consumption and the battery lifetime, also based on advanced data models.
Yeah, that's also the second aspect, sustainability, that I want to, of course, touch upon, which, Xavier, you know, is an important aspect of the development and future of aviation. There's a lot of different aspects that go into the sustainability part. So next to sort of sustainable aviation fuels and electric engines, what role does data currently play in Lufthansa's goals of being a more sustainable aviation company?
Actually, that's a very good question, because next to the big game changers of flying new aircrafts or new sources of energy, the rest of the sustainability equation is purely powered by data. Lufthansa has subscribed to science-based targets for environmental carbon neutrality, with an agenda lined up all the way to 2050. And a sizable portion of the target that we're tracking against internally has to do with making sure that we fly more efficiently, but also simple, little data-driven improvements to everyday operations. Let me give you, for instance, a tangible example. When we fly an aircraft, we carry passengers, we carry baggages, and we carry some food and some water for the passengers to drink on board. The water is actually quite heavy, and forecasting the right amount of water for that flight and the return is an equation that demands quite a good forecast. We have recently integrated better water, it's called water tankering in the industry terms, and that actually saves tons and tons of carbon and fuel every year, thanks to an algorithm that was put in place last year. Just as a tiny example of the many little things that come into play and then end up forming the larger equation of how we meet those targets.
Yeah, I think that was a really lively example that everyone can also relate to, as having been passengers on an airplane. Klaus, you also have a little bit of a different perspective on the sustainability aspect. You touched upon it's more because you're all electric, right? It's more about maximizing battery life. What role does data play in that aspect for you?
So here data is really crucial, because battery is essentially the biggest part of our aircraft that creates an environmental impact. And it's two factors. The one is the battery production. So we need to maximize really the use of the battery, but then also, of course, the energy we use, we want to charge the batteries with the renewable sources. But especially on the battery lifetime, that we can influence with data. On the one hand, in the beginning, we have to be very conservative. It's still a safety aspect, so we won't really use the battery to the full extent when we start next year. But then we will gather data and learn, and then we gather the data to prove to the authorities that we can use the batteries for many more cycles than we start with. But then already during operation, we can also use data to maximize the battery lifetime. As you know, battery lifetime decreases faster if you charge fast. And in that way, by having our fully integrated system, we exactly know how much time we have to charge a battery, and we will always maximize that time, for example, by overnight charging, and this will increase also the battery lifetime from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's also really interesting. And I think an aspect that is very particular to your business model, right? Because when we think about aviation, a lot of the sustainability aspects are about optimizing flight routes and sort of reducing carbon emissions.
Exactly. And it's, let's say, not only the sustainability aspect, it's also the major cost driver for our business. So the more we get out of battery, the better.
Absolutely. And you both already touched upon the fact that sort of collaboration and communication also plays a really large role, especially when we think about sort of the mobility of the future, right? Because we picture a much more interconnected sort of mobility understanding in the way that we use mobility. So, Xavier, maybe a quick input on sort of what role collaboration with regard to using data plays for you at Lufthansa, and also maybe what are your most important partners to that regard?
Yeah, maybe two aspects. When you bring the word collaboration, I have to think about our staff. You know, it's not just about optimizing the machine, optimizing the operation. It's also about enabling our staff, be it on the ground or in the aircraft, to deliver the best service. And here data plays a big role. For instance, one of the improvements that we are bringing right now, last month, or this month, June, to tackle the upcoming summer, is to giving our cabin crews additional insights about who's sitting on board. Of course, within the limits of GDPR consent, based on data that you, as a customer, has opted in to share with us, we're able to display to our crews, look, this is Leah, and she has internally, basically a customer retention score, so an alert level. You are either very satisfied or not, or maybe at the risk of being completely dissatisfied and flying with the competition. And that we are able to flag and let our cabin crew deliver a service that's going to be tailored to you, your needs, your experience. So you see, when we think about collaboration, there's a large part that has to do with acceptance of AI models and how we roll that out to the human beings that are performing the service. And now the same is true on the operations side. You were asking about partners. And I told you before, we work with pretty much every hyperscaler, actually every. We have a privileged partnership with Google. We work with their operational research team to develop these large models which basically take every side of our system, the operations, the customer. And with Google, we are able to equip the people that are sitting in our operations control center with additional insights, best recommendations, a little bit like how AlphaGo ended up beating the human being at the game of Go, simply because they're able to predict more steps than the human brain would ever do. Exploring that space of possibilities gives the machine the ability to offer different recommendations as to, for instance, which flight to delay. If my Marseille flight is going to come late to Munich, I might not take that Marseille crew on my next flight to Berlin and call in early on my standby crew that was scheduled to fly to Hamburg to fly to Berlin and swap my Marseille crew to Hamburg. A human being might be able to do one or two of these chess of Go moves, and we have experts there that have, drawing on 20, 30 years of experience managing these operations. And now what we do in order to help them is offer the machine recommendation, but not overwrite their choice with the machine recommendations. That's also really important. Like I was talking about cabin crew, to build acceptance. They are offered an alternative, and they can say, oh, that's a really good idea. I didn't think about doing all these swaps. I'll do that. That's really cool. Or they might say, oh, I get it, but that's a little too crazy. There are side effects that pulling that aircraft from the hangar, that the machine doesn't. So let me overwrite and still make my human decision. And we see that with this combination of, you could call it augmented intelligence, we get savings, improve service, basically.
So a lot of potential also hidden there. Looking at the time, we're almost out, but backstage we talked about both of you attending Paris Air Show last week, and to wrap our discussion up, I wanted to ask you each what sort of the most fascinating innovation you experienced there last week was, or which innovation sort of gave you the biggest impulse for something that you want to achieve at your job. Maybe Klaus, you want to go first?
So, yeah, I think what we really see is now the electrification of aviation, and that's an exciting movement. And then also the eVTOL space, there's a lot of players out there that now produce new types of air vehicles, so it's really a new era of aviation coming up.
Fascinating. You?
Yeah, I would say for us, we are looking at mass transportation worldwide. And so these advances that were very impressive at the Paris Air Show, where the eVTOL players like Volocopter were in a hangar like this one, dedicated to them, that even 3 years back was impossible to even think. So that's great. It shows the direction. The excitement is about the prospect of the development to come. Yet there is a little bit of a reality factor kicking in when you have to put the Lufthansa brand on it or operate it at a scale which we operate, which demands that those new machines fly on a longer range, on longer time, higher gauges, higher volumes of passengers. And so what's really exciting, for instance, is the prospect of future battery technology, solid-state batteries, for instance, which will potentially break the energy density requirements to fly larger aircraft at some point, which would really be then a game changer for the type of operation that at least Lufthansa powers, maybe as opposed to an individual private taxi, which is a fancy toy, but needs to grow in scale in order to operate with us.
Very cool, very interesting. Thank you both. We're unfortunately already out of time. It was a very short 20 minutes, but thank you for your insights on how aviation will look in the future, what you're both doing to achieve it. And yeah, thank you for your time. And with that, we'll go back to Sarah.